Mid-February 1943, somewhere near the Tunisian frontier. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel hunched over his desk, composing a letter to his beloved Lucy. Beyond the canvas walls of his command tent, the Afrika Korps was drowning victory in whatever passed for celebration in the desert. Inside, Rommel was dissecting his enemy like a surgeon examining a failed specimen. His pen moved with surgical precision across the paper. The Americans, he wrote, were fundamentally unready. Their soldiers seemed unprepared for the brutality of modern warfare. Their commanders made errors so elementary that any European military academy would have expelled them. He had just witnessed the complete disintegration of American forces at Kasserine Pass. Over 6,000 casualties in less than a week, entire units capitulating, hardware littering the sand like a child's abandoned toys. It reminded him uncomfortably of France in 1940. This wasn't merely a tactical setback for the Americans. This was a psychological earthquake. Young men who'd grown up on romanticized tales of the Great War were suddenly confronting a terrifying question. Were they simply not built for this? Rommel saw more than an opening on the map. He believed he was watching the American fighting spirit shatter in real time. Strike again within weeks, he advised Lucy and later Berlin, and Germany could drive these inexperienced soldiers into the Mediterranean before they figu. Read out how warfare actually worked. His assessment wasn't rooted in prejudice. It was rooted in observation. At Kasserine, American forces had failed on every meaningful level. Unit positioning was amateurish. Radio discipline evaporated under stress. Infantry and armor operated as if they'd never trained together. When the German attack came, panic spread like wildfire through the American lines. Soldiers retreating without orders, creating a cascading collapse that no commander could contain. The American Second Corps commander, Major General Lloyd Fredendall, had established his headquarters in a canyon 70 miles behind the fighting. He commanded by telephone and radio without ever laying eyes on the actual battlefield. His orders arrived confused, contradictory, sometimes dangerous, sly, obsolete. German intelligence compiled meticulous dossiers. The American gear was acceptable. American soldiers, when cornered, could fight with desperate courage. But the American command architecture was fundamentally amateur. These men had never faced the Wehrmacht before. They were learning the most lethal curriculum in the world without the benefit of preparation. Rommel calculated conservatively 6 months minimum to repair their leadership structure, probably a full year to develop functioning battlefield doctrine. Strike in March, and Germany could expect similar results. German armored warfare had proven itself flawless against every opponent since 1939. The formula was elegant. Concentrate overwhelming force at a vulnerable point. Pierce the line with mechanized spearhead. Exploit the rupture with mobile formations. Force the enemy into retreat or encirclement. This doctrine had demolished French armies in 6 weeks. It had annihilated Soviet forces in 1941. It had pushed British armies backward across North Africa, twice. The system worked because most armies fought reactively, attempting to defend lines that German mobility could simply bypass. Kasserine had demonstrated that Americans fought identically, establishing static defensive positions and waiting for the attack. When German armor massed against weak sectors, American forces withdrew rather than counterattacking. Rommel studied the terrain around El Guettar in central Tunisia. The geography was perfect for another demonstration. Strike there in late March. Catch American units still psychologic. Alley wounded from Kasserine, and the psychological momentum alone would prove decisive. Berlin endorsed his analysis. One more offensive would completely shatter American morale. Then Germany could redistribute forces to confront the British while the Americans shipped their defeated army back across the Atlantic. Then German intelligence reported something interesting. A command change. March 6, 1943. Lieutenant General George S. Patton Jr., assumed command of the 2nd Corps, the same corps that had disintegrated at Kasserine Pass. The atmosphere transformed before Patton uttered a single word. He arrived in a screaming motorcade, sirens wailing, wearing those famous ivory-handled revolvers strapped to his hips like a gunfighter from the Old West. He didn't issue orders, he issued an ultimatum. The era of the soft American was finished. Patton mandated ties and regulation helmets in the suffocating desert heat, not from vanity, but to psychologically reprogram his men. They were professionals now, not defeated refugees stumbling through the sand. Officers arriving improperly dressed were fined immediately. Soldiers who forgot to salute received public reprimands. German annales. TS remained unimpressed. One general couldn't repair systemic failures in 3 weeks. Patton might marginally improve morale, might enforce stricter discipline, but he couldn't teach an entire corps revolutionary doctrine in less than a month. Rommel's health was deteriorating, stomach problems, crushing exhaustion, but his tactical mind remained razor-sharp. He reviewed the Guettar operation one final time before transferring command to General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim. The plan presumed American defensive rigidity. It presumed American hesitation under pressure. It presumed 3 weeks wasn't enough time to transform an army. Every presumption was logical based on German experience against every previous opponent. March 23, 1943. Dawn, Guettar. German forces launched their assault. Expecting another triumph, they were about to discover that 3 weeks was sufficient time to change everything that mattered. The attack commenced at 0600 hours. Lead elements of the 10th Panzer Division rolled toward American positions held by the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red one. Then American artillery spoke. Not exploratory fire, not scattered harassment, coordinated time-on-target sal. Vos. Multiple batteries dropping shells on German positions simultaneously, every round arriving at the exact same second. This level of artillery synchronization was something German forces, still heavily dependent on horse-drawn artillery, simply couldn't replicate. The accuracy was shocking. The volume was apocalyptic. German tanks absorbed direct hits. Radio operators transmitted urgent casual. Thank you evacuation requests. The Americans weren't suppressed. They were firing back with precision, suggesting professional forward observers and veteran artillery crews. The 10th Panzer kept advancing. This was expected resistance. Americans would fracture under sustained pressure. Then American tank destroyers opened fire from concealed positions. German Mark IV's started taking flank shots. The Americans weren't defending from obvious locations. They'd positioned anti-tank weapons to create crossfire zones that made German armor vulnerable regardless of facing. By 0900 hours, German forces had penetrated 2,000 yards into American positions. This was normal offensive progress, but the Americans weren't retreating. They were conducting disciplined fighting withdrawals to prepared secondary positions. For the men of the 1st Infantry Division, Guettar wasn't just combat, it was exorcism. They were the same soldiers humiliated at Kasserine Pass. As the 10th Panzer rolled toward them, the Big Red one didn't look for escape routes. They looked through their sights. They had transformed fear into cold professional fury. German radio intercepts captured American communications. The tone was professional, calm, officers delivering clear tactical orders, units reporting positions and coordinating fields of fire. This wasn't the panicked radio chaos from Kasserine. American infantry held positions under German fire until ordered to withdraw. When they withdrew, they displaced to new positions and immediately resumed fighting. They weren't running. They were executing tactical, retrograde movements that preserved unit cohesion while making every German yard cost blood. By noon, the German advance had stalled at 3,000 yards. This wasn't the breakthrough. Kasserine had led commanders to anticipate. March 24th, von Arnim recommended terminating the offensive. German casualties were mounting without achieving breakthrough. American positions were too strong. The attack was suspended. German forces withdrew. German intelligence scrambled to understand what had happened. They interrogated captured American soldiers. They analyzed documents recovered from the battlefield. The Americans hadn't received new equipment. They hadn't received massive reinforcements. They hadn't trained for months in revolutionary tactics. The transformation occurred in 21 days under Patton's command. Patton's methodology was brutal but effective. First, a leadership purge. He fired officers who hesitated. He promoted men who attacked. Command positions went to officers who understood that velocity. And aggression won battles. Second, doctrinal revolution. Every unit learned to counterattack immediately when attacked. Artillery concentrated fire to achieve overwhelming effects at decisive points. Defense meant aggressive patrolling and spoiling attacks, never passive waiting. Third, psychological transformation. Patton convinced soldiers they were superior to their enemy, not through speeches but through training that rewarded aggression and punished caution. The entire corps absorbed one lesson: attack succeeds, hesitation kills. German commanders analyzing Guettar realized the Americans had adopted doctrine that neutralized German tactical advantages. German doctrine relied on concentrated armor breaking through weak points. American doctrine responded with mobile anti-tank weapons. Precision to create crossfire. German advances became costly regardless of armor superiority. German doctrine assumed defenders would retreat under sustained pressure. American doctrine taught immediate counterattacks that disrupted German momentum. What looked like victory suddenly became a fight for survival. The Germans had prided themselves on technical superiority and individual excellence. Americans countered with coordination and industrial-scale firepower. The Germans celebrated the skill of individual panzer commanders. The Americans responded with the mechanical symphony of time-on-target artillery strikes. For German infantry, it felt like the sky was collapsing. The Americans weren't trying to match German technical advantages. They were making technical advantages irrelevant. Through superior coordination. May 13, 1943. German forces in Tunisia surrendered. Over 250,000 Axis prisoners. The North African campaign concluded. The Americans had traveled from humiliation at Kasserine Pass to victory in Tunisia in less than 3 months. When interrogators questioned captured German generals after the war, a consistent theme emerged: stunned, almost reluctant respect. EY had expected Americans to be like the French or early Soviets, slow learners, easily demoralized. Instead, they encountered an opponent that evolved at a speed that felt almost unfair. General Hasso von Manteuffel, who commanded panzer forces against American armies in 1944 and 45, stated that Americans learned faster than any army Germany faced. They identified weaknesses and corrected them within weeks, not months. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring testified that American artillery coordination was the most effective he encountered in 6 years of war. The consensus among German military professionals: American forces in 1945 were unrecognizable from American forces in 1943. The 90 days between Kasserine and Tunisia changed everything. Leadership mattered more than experience. Doctrine mattered more than equipment. Aggressive mindset mattered more than technical superiority. The Germans built superior tanks. The Americans built superior doctrine. When the two collided at Guettar, doctrine prevailed. It prevailed again in Sicily. It prevailed in Normandy. It prevailed across France and into the heart of Germany. By May 1943, German generals stopped underestimating American soldiers because they finally understood. The man across the foxhole wasn't a tourist playing soldier. He was the architect of their inevitable defeat.